Some women don't know when to walk away. She had the money, the gifts, the luxury. She had everything a side chick could want. But that wasn't enough. She wanted more. She wanted the wife's place. And when a woman like her doesn't stay in her lane, she learns the hard way, some men don't forgive betrayal. She made one call. One stupid call. And just like that, she disappeared. No body. No traces. No justice. Only one question remains, was she a victim? Or did she dig her own grave? Welcome to True Crime. Subscribe now and stay in the know. Bottom of form Rashad Rim Carter wasn't just a name in the streets, he was a legend. The kind of man whose presence alone was enough to command fear and respect. He didn't come from money. He built his empire brick by brick, deal by deal, and body by body. He started at the bottom, a young hustler running packages for men who would later beg for his protection. While others played checkers, Rashad played chess. Every move was calculated. Every decision had a purpose. By the time he hit his 30s, he was untouchable. His name alone could shut down entire blocks, and when he spoke, people listened. Not because they wanted to, but because they knew the consequences of disobedience. Rashad didn't tolerate weakness. He didn't tolerate betrayal. And above all, he didn't tolerate anyone making him look like a fool. But if there was one thing Rashad truly valued, one thing he would never gamble with, it was his wife, Nyla. She wasn't just his woman, she was his foundation. The only person who had been with him when he had nothing, back when he was still hustling out of a rundown apartment, scraping together a future. She had seen the blood, the struggle, the sacrifices. She never asked questions, never wavered, never demanded more than what he was willing to give. And because of that, he gave her everything. Mansions. Cars. Jewelry. Power. She was the only woman who could walk into a room full of men who feared him and hold her head high, untouched, unchallenged. But a man is a man. Rashad convinced himself that stepping outside his marriage wasn't betrayal, it was just a perk of the life he built. Something powerful men do. A way to remind himself that no matter how much he gave to one woman, he could still have others. As long as Nyla never knew, there was no issue. That was the rule. The only rule. And that's exactly what he told the women he entertained. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't make promises. He didn't lie about leaving his wife. He made it clear, they would never be more than what they were. They could enjoy the lifestyle, the attention, the gifts, but the moment they forgot their place, they would lose it all. When he met Alea Parker, she seemed to understand the arrangement. She played the role well at first, never called too much, never asked for more than what he gave. But Rashad should have known better. Some women don't settle for second place. Some don't understand the boundaries they were never meant to cross. And Alea? She was one of them. Rashad ran his empire with precision. He expected the same control over his personal life. What happens in the dark stays in the dark. That's how he operated. And anyone who disrupted that order, didn't live long enough to do it again. Bottom of form Alea Parker was the kind of woman who never settled for being in the background. She had always known what she wanted, power, luxury, and a man who could give her both. At 27, she had spent enough time around the right people to understand how the game was played. She had watched women fall into the trap of being disposable, treated like accessories to men with money and influence. But Alea wasn't like them. She wasn't satisfied with temporary affection, fleeting moments, or expensive gifts that could be snatched away the moment a man lost interest. She wanted security. She wanted a title. And when she met Rashad Carter, she saw her golden ticket. It wasn't by chance that she ended up at the atrium, an exclusive lounge that catered only to the city's most elite criminals, businessmen, and power players. She had been invited by a woman who had once been at the top, back when she was the main woman for a cartel boss. But that woman had made a mistake. She had demanded too much, thinking love could outweigh power, and she was cast aside like she never mattered. Alea took notes. She wasn't about to make the same misstep. The night Rashad walked into the lounge, she felt the shift in the room before she even saw him. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. He didn't need to announce himself, his presence did that for him. He wasn't flashy, didn't wear loud designer brands or excessive jewelry like the others. He exuded wealth without needing to prove it. He was the kind of man who moved in silence, controlling everything without ever having to raise his voice. Alea knew men like him didn't chase women, they expected women to chase them. That's why she did the opposite. She made sure to sit in his direct line of sight but never looked his way. She laughed at her friends' jokes, sipped her drink slowly, and pretended not to notice when Rashad's eyes landed on her. She made him come to her. And he did. One conversation turned into a private meeting. A private meeting turned into late-night calls, secret meetups, and expensive gifts. She played her role perfectly, never asking for too much, never making him feel like she was a burden. She made herself indispensable. She convinced Rashad that she was the kind of woman who knew her place, who wouldn't cause problems. But in her mind, she was plotting. Unlike the other women who came and went, Alea wanted more. She wanted to replace Nyla. She saw herself wearing the crown, walking beside Rashad, not behind him. And she knew exactly how to make it happen. One night, after another secret rendezvous, she started feeling different. At first, she ignored it, a little nausea, a little fatigue. Nothing serious. But when it didn't go away, something in her gut told her to check. She stopped by a pharmacy on the way home, bought a pregnancy test, and took it the second she walked into her apartment. 2 lines. She was pregnant. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the test. A slow smile spread across her lips. This was it. This was her way in. Rashad had no choice now. For weeks, she kept it to herself, waiting for the perfect moment. She knew she had to play it right. If she told him too soon, he might try to make her get rid of it. If she waited too long, she risked losing control of the situation. She had to make it work in her favor. She convinced herself that this child would be the key to everything. If she was carrying Rashad's baby, that meant she had leverage. That meant she wasn't just another woman in his life, she was family. And in his world, family was untouchable. But there was one thing Alea didn't consider. Rashad was not the kind of man who could be forced into anything. He had already warned her, stay in your place, or there would be consequences. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought she had locked in her future. But what she didn't realize was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Bottom of form Rashad had always been careful. He didn't make mistakes, didn't leave room for error. Everything in his life was calculated, including the women he entertained. He had a rule, what happens in the dark stays there. He expected discipline, control. He expected women to know their place. But Alea wasn't like the others. She didn't just want to be a secret, she wanted to be the queen. And when she realized Rashad wasn't going to hand her the crown, she decided to take it for herself. The moment presented itself in a way that seemed almost too easy. Rashad had just finished an intense conversation when his phone buzzed again. It was his right-hand man, a call he couldn't ignore. He picked up the phone, listening intently, his expression unreadable. In the middle of the call, something else grabbed his attention, one of his men signaling him from the other room. Without thinking, Rashad dropped the call and kept his phone on the couch and walked away. Alea's heart pounded. She knew better than to touch his phone. Rashad wasn't the type of man to play about his privacy. But in that moment, she saw an opening. She hesitated for only a second before snatching the phone and swiping up. The screen was still unlocked. She had seconds. She scrolled. Contacts. She tapped into them, moving fast, her eyes darting over the names until she found it. Nyla Carter. She didn't have time to think. She memorized the number, repeating it in her head, forcing herself to remember it before the screen went dark. Just as she heard Rashad's footsteps approaching, she quickly placed the phone back where he left it and leaned back against the couch like nothing happened. She had it now. The direct line to the one woman standing in her way. Later that night, she sat in her apartment, staring at the number she had written down. A glass of wine sat untouched beside her. She didn't need liquid courage, she was ready. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She smirked. She wasn't scared. If anything, she was excited. She tapped the screen. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then a voice answered. Cool, calm, collected. Hello. For a second, Alea didn't speak. She expected Nyla to sound broken. To sound weak. But there was no hesitation in her voice. No fear. Alea's lips curled into a smile. She leaned back in her chair, twirling a strand of her hair between her fingers. I just thought you should know, she said, her tone dripping with amusement. Your husband and I have been together for over a year now. And guess what? I'm pregnant. Silence. Alea smirked, waiting for a reaction. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 100 times. She imagined Nyla crying, begging, losing her composure. She wanted to hear the heartbreak, the anger. But instead. Nothing. Alea continued. I called because I think it's time for you to step aside. Rashad doesn't love you anymore. You were his past. I'm his future. And I'm calling to let you know, you're wasting your time if you think he's going to stay with you. Still, no response. Alea's confidence grew. She laughed, mocking the woman on the other end of the line. Be smart about this, Nyla. You already lost. Rashad deserves a woman who can give him a real family. My baby isn't about to be a bastard. He needs a mother and father. Married. She waited. Waited for Nyla to crack. But Nyla stayed quiet. Then, finally, a soft exhale. Alea frowned slightly, not expecting the next words that came. Are you finished? Alea blinked. Nyla's voice was so calm. So controlled. It threw her off for a second. Alea swallowed, irritation creeping in. Did you hear what I said? I said I'm having your husband's baby. I heard you, Nyla replied. Is that all? Alea gritted her teeth. This wasn't the reaction she wanted. She wanted rage, screaming, desperation. But Nyla wasn't giving her any of it. She sat up, her voice turning sharp. I'm not playing with you, Nyla. You need to get a divorce. Rashad is mine now. This time, Nyla let out a small laugh. It was quiet, almost like she was amused. And then she said something that made Alea's blood run cold. You think you're the first? Alea froze. I've been Rashad's wife for 10 years, Nyla continued, her tone steady. You think I don't know how this works? You think you're special? Alea clenched her jaw. You made 2 mistakes, Nyla interrupted. First, you thought you could replace me. Second, you called me. That was the real mistake. Alea's stomach twisted. Nyla's voice dropped lower, her words slow and deliberate. You have no idea what you just did. Then the line went dead. Alea stared at her phone, the silence in the room suddenly feeling heavy. For the first time since she started playing this game, she felt something she wasn't used to. Doubt. She should have known. She had just sealed her fate. Nyla didn't say a word that night. She had every opportunity to confront him, to ask him if there was something he needed to tell her. But she didn't. She had been Rashad's wife for too long to act on emotions. This wasn't about catching him in a lie, it was about watching him lie to her face. She knew how he operated, how his mind worked. A man like Rashad never admitted to his wrongs unless he had no other option. And she wasn't about to give him the chance to talk his way out of this. So she waited. Rashad came home like nothing had happened. He moved as he always did, cool, composed, in control. He ate, showered, climbed into bed beside her like he didn't just put his entire life in danger. She felt the weight of his arm over her, steady and familiar. But now, all she felt was disgust. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing as he drifted off to sleep. He had no idea. The next morning started like any other. Rashad moved through his routine, early wake-up, checking his phone, making quiet calls, running through his schedule for the day. Nyla acted normal, playing her role perfectly. She wasn't going to be the one to tell him. She wanted to see how long he would keep up the lie. But Rashad never got the chance. Just as he was preparing to leave, his right-hand man, Tariq, approached him, his expression unreadable. Tariq wasn't the type to bring gossip or speak on things that didn't matter. If he was bringing this up, it was serious. Yo. Tariq's voice was low, controlled, but there was something behind it. Something that said you need to hear this. Rashad barely glanced up from his phone. What's up? Tariq didn't hesitate. Alaya called Nyla. Silence. Rashad's hands stopped moving. His jaw locked. He blinked, slowly turning his head toward Tariq. What? His voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made Tariq keep his stance firm. She told her everything, Tariq said, still calm, watching Rashad's reaction closely. The affair. The pregnancy. Pregnancy. Rashad's stomach dropped. His head snapped up fully now, eyes narrowing. Tariq exhaled, nodding slightly. That's what she told Nyla. That she's pregnant with your kid. Rashad's body tensed. His fingers curled around the phone in his hand so tight it was a wonder it didn't crack. His heartbeat pounded against his ears. No. That didn't make sense. Alaya couldn't be pregnant. She wasn't supposed to be pregnant. He had always been careful. Every time he dealt with a woman outside of Nyla, he made sure there were no strings attached. No proof. No evidence. No leverage. After every intimate moment, he handed them the same pill, every single time. No exceptions. It was a rule. So how? Was she lying? Or had she played him? His breathing deepened, his mind racing, shifting between disbelief and rage. Tariq could see it happening, the way Rashad was calculating his next move, the way his emotions were fighting to break through his controlled exterior. How do you know all this? Rashad's voice was low, strained. Tariq nodded toward his phone. Nyla called Keisha. Told her everything. Keisha. Tariq's woman. She and Nyla weren't exactly friends, but they were in the same circle, and when Nyla needed to talk, she picked the woman closest to her who knew what life with a man like Rashad was like. Keisha, in turn, told Tariq. That meant Nyla was talking. That meant Rashad's business was being discussed. He looked down at his phone, thumb hovering over Nyla's contact, but he didn't call. Instead, he looked back at Tariq. His voice was calm. Controlled. But there was something deadly beneath it. Where is she? Tariq didn't have to ask who he meant. Still at her place. She thinks she won. Rashad exhaled through his nose. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Alaya hadn't just crossed a line. She burned it down. She didn't just betray him. She disrespected him. And there was only one way to handle that. Rashad sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, his mind silent but dangerous. He had played it over in his head 100 times, trying to understand how he let this happen. How a woman he never planned to keep had managed to put him in a position like this. But he wasn't the type to waste time on regrets. What was done was done. Now, he had to clean it up. He picked up his phone, scrolled down to Alaya's number, and hit dial. The phone rang twice before she answered. "Hey, baby," her voice came through, light, teasing, confident. Too confident. Rashad kept his voice calm, smooth as always, but with just enough emotion to sell it. "Let's talk," he said. "I made up my mind." There was a pause. He could hear the excitement in the way she inhaled, the way she was already picturing the future she thought she had won. "You did?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but failing to hide the eagerness in her voice. "Yeah," Rashad said. "Let's meet up. Just us." That was all she needed to hear. Alaya grinned on the other end of the call, not realizing she had just sealed her fate. "Okay," she said quickly. "When?" "Tonight." "I knew you'd come around," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Rashad didn't respond. They settled on a time. A place. Somewhere private. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere she wouldn't walk away from. Alaya hung up the phone, grinning to herself as she tossed it onto the bed. She felt untouchable. Everything had gone exactly the way she planned. She grabbed her phone again and typed out a text to her friend. "It's happening. I'll be Mrs. Carter soon." She hovered over the send button. But then she stopped. Something in her told her to wait. Not because she was suspicious, not because she thought anything was wrong, but because she wanted to confirm it first. She wanted to see Rashad say it to her face. To watch him tell her that Nyla was out of the picture. To feel the moment when she officially won. So instead of hitting send, she locked her phone and went to get ready. She would never get the chance to send that text. Bottom of form. Alaya arrived at the secluded location, the night air thick with anticipation. She stepped out of her car, adjusting her dress, smiling to herself. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She had won. She was about to secure her future. She walked toward the dimly lit spot where Rashad stood, his silhouette sharp against the glow of the street lamp. He was already there, hands in his pockets, unmoving. Watching. She didn't notice the way his eyes were darker than usual. The way his entire body was too still. She only saw what she wanted to see, a man coming to claim her. She let out a soft chuckle, tilting her head. "I knew you'd come around," she said, her voice sweet, laced with triumph. Rashad didn't respond. He didn't nod. Didn't smile. Didn't give her anything. His face never changed. Alaya slowed her step slightly, her confidence faltering for the first time. Something felt off, but she pushed past the feeling. This was Rashad. Her Rashad. She took another step closer, but then, his voice cut through the silence, cold and sharp. "You really thought you could play me?" Her breath caught in her throat. "What?" she asked, forcing out a small laugh, as if he was joking. But Rashad wasn't joking. He took a slow step forward, his expression unreadable. "You thought you could go behind my back? Call my wife?" Alaya's stomach twisted. She opened her mouth to speak, but a gunshot ripped through the night. The impact sent her body jerking backward, her hands flying to her stomach, eyes wide in shock. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she crumbled to the ground, gasping for air. She tried to speak, tried to reach out, but Rashad just stared down at her, unmoved. "You did this to yourself," he muttered. Aleya's lips parted, a choked sound escaping, but no words followed. Her game was over. Within seconds, Rashad's men emerged from the darkness, already knowing what needed to be done. "Get rid of her," Rashad ordered, his voice cold, detached. They moved quickly, efficiently. No traces. No evidence. Just a missing woman. Nyla had always known the truth, even before the call that confirmed it. She wasn't naive, she was a wife who understood the world she married into. Rashad was powerful, untouchable in the streets, and men like him didn't operate within the rules of loyalty the way regular men did. She had accepted that a long time ago. But she had one rule. "If you must cheat, don't let me find out. And never let your side chick contact me." She didn't ask questions. She didn't go through his phone. She didn't demand explanations. As long as she remained his only queen, his only wife, the one who held the throne, she was willing to look the other way. But Aleya? Aleya broke the rule. And Rashad let it happen. A part of her had expected him to handle it, but she didn't expect the weight of it to hit so soon. Aleya didn't just disappear, she was erased. And Nyla knew exactly who was responsible. For a while, she said nothing. She watched Rashad move like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't disrespected her. Like he hadn't made her the last to know. He still came home, still laid beside her, still touched her like he hadn't betrayed everything they built. That was when she realized, this wasn't love anymore. A week later, she made a decision. She leaked the affair herself. Not through gossip. Not through whispers. Through evidence. She made sure the right people found out, detectives who had been looking for a reason to bring Rashad down. She didn't need to give them everything, just enough to make them start asking questions. A trace of Aleya's last phone call. A piece of information about where she was last seen. A quiet, anonymous tip that placed Rashad exactly where he didn't need to be. She didn't do it just because of the affair. She did it because he broke his word. He had warned Aleya about crossing the line. But what he failed to realize was that Nyla had warned him, too. She wasn't the type of woman to beg. She wasn't the type to cry over betrayal. She was the type to remind a man exactly who he was dealing with. Do you think she was right to betray him? Or should she have stood by him? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Bottom of form. Rashad Carter had spent his entire life staying ahead of the game. He built an empire, outplayed his enemies, and made sure no one could ever touch him. But in the end, it wasn't the streets, the cops, or his rivals that took him down. It was his own wife. The police had been after Rashad for years, but they never had enough to make anything stick. Witnesses disappeared, evidence went missing, and anyone who tried to come after him ended up regretting it. He was untouchable, until now. The case started as a missing persons investigation. Aleya Parker vanished without a trace. No signs of struggle, no evidence of where she went. But the moment law enforcement started looking into her disappearance, they found one crucial detail. Her last phone call was to Nyla Carter. It didn't take long for them to start connecting the dots. A mistress calling the wife hours before going missing. A woman publicly telling people she was pregnant by one of the most powerful men in the city. It was enough to spark curiosity. But curiosity wasn't enough to bring Rashad down. Real evidence was needed. And thanks to Nyla, they got it. Through an anonymous tip, they found a deleted surveillance clip showing Aleya's car pulling up to the location where she was last seen. A second clip, hours later, showed Rashad leaving the area, alone. The pressure started building. Rashad's inner circle felt the heat. People who would have taken a bullet for him started second-guessing their loyalty. And when the cops finally knocked on his door, Rashad knew. This wasn't going away. The night he was arrested, he didn't resist. Didn't run. He simply stared at Nyla. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching as the police placed him in cuffs. There was no emotion on her face. No sadness. No regret. Just a quiet understanding. Rashad's trial was one of the biggest cases the city had seen. A kingpin finally taken down, a missing woman presumed dead, and the wife who delivered the final blow. Witnesses who once feared him suddenly found their voices. Deals were cut. The truth came out in pieces, but every piece led back to him. And in the end, it didn't matter how much money he had, how many lawyers he could afford. The evidence was there. The betrayal was too deep. Life without parole. That was his sentence. The courtroom was silent when the verdict was read. Rashad didn't flinch. He just nodded once, like a man who already knew his fate. But as they led him away, he looked at Nyla one last time. She didn't look away. She had told him before, if you must cheat, don't let me find out. And never let your side chick contact me. She had given him a chance. And when he ignored it, she reminded him why she was the one who stood beside him all those years. She wasn't a woman to be played with. Power is a dangerous thing. Rashad had it all: money, respect, control. But the one thing he never expected was that the biggest threat to his empire wasn't his enemies, but the woman who knew him best. Nyla wasn't an outsider. She wasn't someone he could silence, pay off, or erase. She was the one person who had the power to bring him down, and when the time came, she didn't hesitate. But was she right? Did Nyla do what she had to do, or was Rashad still in control until the very end? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because some betrayals are deadly. Some secrets should never be revealed. But in the end, was it really worth it? If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more intense crime stories.